The question today is, where is God? Where is God? We have all sorts of ideas about where God is. If he or she exists at all, where is this God? Is it an old guy with white hair upstairs somewhere? I think we'd all say, I don't think so, regardless of what Michelangelo painted. Is God in the sky? That's kind of a symbol the Bible uses. God is up in the sky, firmament. Is God in space? Now that we know about something about science, we know the sky isn't the end, and where is he? Is he in some space? Or is maybe God's in a whole other universe we don't even know about? Or maybe God is the universe. That's pantheism. Is God in a temple? Confined to a temple? Okay, well, I'm done with my sermon now. God's in our hearts, right? That's right. That's where this is going. That's good. Some people think God's in the sanctuary, the church. I actually had a deacon. He said he can't worship anywhere but at church because that's where God is. Is there any place where God is not? We've been talking about that a lot this morning already. I think we'd all say, no, there's no place where God is not. In our story today, Stephen defends his view of where God is. I'm not going to read the whole 7 to 16 because it's kind of long. We're going to just click through it and read it that way. But I want you to look at 6:13 to start with, because that's what we see he's accused of. This is what Stephen's accused of. These false witnesses says, this man does not stop speaking blasphemous words against this holy place and the law. And when he says this holy place, they mean the temple, and therefore he's speaking against God because they thought God was in the temple. They thought this holy place was where they were gathered in the temple. This place was the temple. God was in there. But was he? And was Stephen blaspheming when he said anything against the temple? And that's what he's answering here. They said he was speaking blasphemous words against this holy place. But look at verse 7. Stephen also says, this place. What did Stephen mean when he repeated their words back to them, saying this place? He's reminding them of the story when God had prophesied to Abraham about what was going to happen to the children of Israel in Moses. The whole Moses story. He's reminding them of that. Here's what Stephen says, quoting God in Acts 7:7, I will judge the nation that they will serve as slaves. And of course we know that's Egypt, right? After this, they will come out and worship me in this place. That's what Stephen says to them, quoting their words back to them. But what does he mean by in this place? Where was this place? Of course, Stephen's listeners all knew the Moses story, and we know it too. Where was God in the Moses story? On Mount Sinai. He wasn't in the temple. There was no temple. He wasn't even in the land of Israel at the time. So talking against the land isn't an issue. That's where we are today. We're still talking about his defense about the land. This place was a mountain in the desert. Where was God? On a mountain in the desert. Okay, move on to verse 8. Stephen continues with the covenant that Israel was depending on for their salvation. Then he gave them the covenant of circumcision. After this, he fathered Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. Isaac did the same with Jacob, and Jacob with the 12 patriarchs. Notice what Stephen called them. He didn't call them sons of Jacob or even brothers. He called them patriarchs. And this is really kind of interesting. This is an aside. my commentaries said this is the only time in the Greek manuscripts we have of this word ever being used, patriarchs. Stephen chose this word carefully. It means the 12 founding fathers of the Israelites, the tribes of Israel. Stephen used the word patriarchs to emphasize that the men who are accusing him are just like the patriarchs who persecuted Joseph. His accusers are those same kind of people. They are just like their patriarchs. So we see what the patriarchs were like in verse 9. The patriarchs became jealous of Joseph and sold him into Egypt. The patriarchs were described as jealous and Joseph as wise. So Luke describes the Sanhedrin in Acts here as jealous and Stephen as wise. It's a parallelism, you see. But where was God in the Joseph story? There's still no temple. And he's not on a mountain. Where was God in the Joseph story? He's in Egypt. God's in Egypt. So Stephen continues in verse 9. God was with him, talking about Joseph. God was with him and rescued him out of all his troubles. He gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who appointed him ruler over Egypt and over his whole household. So now God is in Egypt with Joseph, ahead of the patriarchs. He is preparing a place for them through the authority of Joseph, who is only second in power to Pharaoh. In fact, the way Joseph puts it, it sounds like he's been put over Pharaoh because he calls him father to Pharaoh. So that's what we see starting in verse 11. Then a famine and great suffering came over all of Egypt and Canaan, and our ancestors could find no food. When Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt, he sent our ancestors the first time. The second time, Joseph was revealed to his brothers, and Joseph's family became known to Pharaoh. Joseph then invited his father Jacob and all his relatives, 75 people in all, and Jacob went down to Egypt. So Joseph told his brothers that God had prepared for them. This is what he's talking about in Genesis 45, 7-8. It says this. Joseph said to his brothers, God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land, to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Now, there's something that should sound familiar to you here. There's a pattern here, a type, a pattern. It should sound familiar. Here's what it is. See if this sounds familiar to you. Joseph was as good as dead in a pit. He was brought up out of the pit and carried to Pharaoh, where he reigned with all the authority of Pharaoh and prepared a place for his father's family, the patriarchs. Does that pattern sound familiar? You see the pattern? It's just what the disciples were claiming about Jesus. The same thing. Stephen has couched it, the gospel message in the story of Joseph. Jesus was dead in a pit, brought up from the dead, brought up to the right hand of God, where he rules over the kingdom of God, including over you folks, the Sanhedrin. That's what Stephen is saying. Pow! You know, Jesus had even told his disciples he was going to prepare a place for them, just like Joseph told his brothers. Yeah. Okay. And if that isn't enough, Stephen reminds the Sanhedrin that the patriarchs aren't even buried in Israel. Where are the patriarchs? Starting in verse 15. He and our ancestors died there, talking about Egypt, and were carried back to Shechem and were placed in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a sum of silver from the sons of Hamor in Shechem. Where is Shechem? It's in Samaria. The very place the Sanhedrin hates is where their ancestors are buried. Stephen is really poking these people. The ancestors' bones are in the land they hate. Samaria. Okay, once again, Stephen's point is that neither God nor the ancestors' bones are in the land of Israel. God is in the desert and the ancestors' bones are in Samaria. So, with the story of Joseph, Stephen has been telling the Sanhedrin that the accusations against him are false because God can't be contained in the temple or even in the land of Israel. So talking about against the land and talking against the temple is not talking against God, because God's not there in that specific way. You can't contain him. Stephen has been reasoning with great wisdom given to him by the Holy Spirit. But what is wisdom in the face of jealousy and rage? All these people, they'd seen the evidence already for themselves. They knew the facts. They'd seen what Jesus could do. All of these people had seen what Jesus could do, and they knew what he taught. They were even now experiencing the great wonders and miracles that the apostles and Stephen and others were performing right in Jerusalem around them. They knew what Stephen was saying. They were probably even forced to confront the facts and acknowledge that what they knew. But reasoning and facts don't matter when you want to believe a lie. And when you seek out false witnesses, or as we call it today, fake news. Reasoning and facts and clear evidence don't matter when there is an advantage in denying the truth. When there's an advantage for you to deny the truth, facts don't matter. You know, it's so crazy. Whether we like to admit it or not, we don't choose our religion or politics or pretty much anything by carefully reasoning it out. Very few people do. I don't know if anybody really does. We're more like the men who dragged Stephen before the Sanhedrin. As absurd as it is, we choose based on what's an advantage for us and adjust the facts according to what we want them to be. We do this. We align ourselves with the sort of people we want to be like, the sort, that we kind of think of as our tribe in a way, maybe. I want to be like these people, identify with this kind of person. So it doesn't matter about facts and evidence. I want to be like these people. This is how I identify. Now, as dubious as that motivation is, people will even kill to defend it. We are kind of crazy. Something's wrong. You know, that's true in politics, because we all know that right now. But it's also true in religion, and in science, and in art, and just about anything. You choose what's an advantage for you, regardless of evidence and facts that are contrary. I've read psychological reports that people filter stuff like this. That's what we do. So, like Jesus and the apostles, that's what Stephen is up against. He's not defending himself against sound judicial reasoning, because that would have said, okay, Jesus is the Messiah. He's not defending himself against sound judicial reasoning. He's defending himself against jealousy and rage. Now, this story has made a couple of thoughts go rolling around in my head. First, the story of Joseph is like the story of Jesus. We've already mentioned this. Just as Joseph's brothers only recognized Joseph the second time they met him in Egypt. It's the same with Jesus. Jesus performed wonders of love and mercy, but his accusers killed him anyway. They didn't want to recognize him, even though it was obvious who he was. He was resurrected, and they denied it. He was brought to heaven. There he will come again visibly, and when he does, the second time, everyone will recognize him, whether they want to or not. Their knees will bow. That's what it says. Those who acknowledge him now will be rewarded. And those are blessed now who acknowledge him already with his spiritual presence amongst us, as we've just been talking about this morning. You recognize him everywhere. My second thought is a question. Why do I believe this? Why do I believe it, in spite of doubts that plague my mind? How do I just know it's true? How can I rely on this my whole life? Why? Is it because I've studied and reasoned it out from nature and scripture and philosophy, from analysis of comparative religions and philosophies? Yes, I have done some of that. And it is helpful. Studying evidence of the reliability of the Bible is helpful. Looking at facts, things have to have been the way they were. But is that study the reason I'm a Christian? I know there's a lot of, I don't know about a lot, but there's theologians who have studied all this stuff and still don't believe it. Because they've decided not to believe it, I guess. So I don't think study is why I believe these things. Or maybe I believe it because my parents and my grandparents and their parents before them were all Christians, so I just kind of fell into it. Is that why? Maybe. Maybe it's because I was raised that way, raised as a Christian, so I'm a Christian. What is this? Raise up a child when he was young and he'll be that way all his life? Maybe. Maybe I am just a cultural Christian because that's what I've been around all my life. Maybe it's that I simply identify with Christians and so that's who I want to be. Well, the problem there's a lot of Christians I just really don't identify with. So maybe that isn't it. No, I really think there's more to it than that. Family, identification with a group. Maybe there's more to it for you too. What is it? I think it's the same reason that Stephen was so convinced. And the apostles were so convinced. And the original followers of Jesus were so convinced. Even Paul, who hated Jesus and hated all those who follow him, became convinced about Jesus. What was it? They knew Jesus personally. That's what convinced them. It's pretty hard to doubt a person is real when they're standing there talking to you. You're not real. That doesn't work. No, you can't do that. That's why they believed. They knew Jesus personally. How can I say I know Jesus? I know he's living because he's living in me. As you said, thank you. As the hymn says, I serve a risen Savior, he's in the world today. I know that he is living, whatever men may say. I see his hand of mercy, I hear his voice of cheer, and just the time I need him, he's always near. He lives, He lives. Yes. He walks with me and talks with me. How could I doubt him? As confused as my thoughts sometimes are, I know his voice in there. That's what we mean when we say in my heart, I suppose. I hear his voice in my heart. I hear him deep and quiet. It could be my subconscious. Maybe God is in the subconscious. I read a book, a commentary on John that said that God speaks through your unconscious, subconscious. Anyway, it's comforting and reassuring and empowering, and sometimes it's even quite direct, like when I'm writing these sermons. I don't know where the thoughts come from. Seem to come from God. Because I end up with things I'd never thought of before, of writing down. Something in me shows me his presence. And so as we were talking today, you see him everywhere. I see him everywhere I look. C.S. Lewis, he said he was surprised by joy. I live there pretty much every day. Even when I feel depressed, like we had this dark, rainy day, and for some reason I was feeling like really down and everything, but I said, this is a wonderful day, and I feel great. Why do I feel so down? I felt the presence of God, even though my head was all sad-ish, kind of. Yeah. I live there pretty much every day. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas. His hands the wonders wrought. Now you know how we sang that song this morning. So one day, 10 years ago, and I've told you this story before, but this is like my anniversary of this event, I was laying on the floor waiting for the paramedics. I was having a heart attack. Laying there, I thought, maybe today I will die. And I was surprised to find that I was okay with that. It was a surprise. I knew then, in spite of all the doubts that plague my mind, that the foundation and bedrock of my life is Jesus. I knew it. And so I was okay. Why? Because I know Jesus personally. Where is God? God is everywhere. You can't locate God in a box. But since he's everywhere, I know he's also personally in my heart, by means of his Holy Spirit within me. Can you say that? You can, you know. He's as close as your lips, as close as your heart. Because if you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. It's that simple. For it's by believing in your heart that you're made right with God. And it's by openly declaring your faith that you're saved. As the scripture tells us, anyone who trusts in the Lord will not be disgraced. You know, Stephen was the first to teach this, that Jews and Gentiles are the same in this respect, and that's another reason that he got himself in trouble. They have the same Lord who generously gives to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Where is God? He's right near you, as close as your lips, as close as your heart, as near as your heart. He's calling to you in there. So you know where God is. And you're okay. Amen. What a hope. Yes.